guess we'll start with a brief introduction of yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Hello, I'm Angela Cook Jackson. I am a professor at Cal State LA, and how I got to where I'm at today, that's a long story. It's a long journey, but I would probably say a little bit of serendipity and a little bit of interest in the field of health communication specifically, um, and then a little bit of just constant engagement in community and community organizing or working in communities. And sometimes it seemed to be around health, just so very naturally. So I guess that's a really short version of how I got to where I am today. But I've lived all over, lived in a number of different states, taught all over. I've been teaching for over 30 years now, and have always been really fascinated by health and by how it interacts with families and health literacy and community, things of that nature.
How long have you been a health comm instructor at Cal State LA, and how long was your whole entire schooling process?
I've been an instructor at Cal State LA since 2017. I would say that I started my schooling probably back in around 1998 or so, because I lost my mom to type 2 diabetes, and I started my PhD program probably a year or so after she passed away. And then I've been pursuing it since that time. My schooling, my actual doctoral program, I was in for at least 6 or 7 years. So I didn't go the traditional route, and I didn't come into the PhD program in a traditional way. I was an administrator. I worked at universities in higher ed administration, and taught a little bit of public speaking on the side. And then the reason I said earlier serendipitously, because my mom ended up having type 2 diabetes, and the onset of it and kind of the last years of her diabetic journey were times when I was really thinking about communication, health, families, how do families talk about health, and how do they communicate about it? And so after she passed away, I started my PhD program, somewhat motivated by her journey and somewhat motivated to find out if there was a way that what we had experienced as a family around her chronic illness had relevance to do research on. So I was really non-traditional, and so I didn't just go through a PhD program like in 4 years. It probably took me, like I said, 6 to 7 years to do it. And when I finished a segment of my PhD program, I went on to live in Albuquerque, New Mexico with my husband. I worked there for a while and slowly just kind of grinded and got my PhD done finally. So a bit longer than most maybe would take, but underneath typically in a PhD program, they give you like a 10-year period to get it finished. Mm-hmm. So under the 10-year window, but a little bit longer than most of my peers have been in the program. Yeah.
And would you say that you knew what health comm was before this experience with your mom, or was that experience something that really got you interested?
Yeah, I did not know what health comm was. And as a matter of fact, the dean at the time, I got my PhD from University of Kentucky. And I was working in higher ed administration. So at that time I was at university in Kentucky, another university in which I was the assistant dean for the College of Professional Studies. And in my head, I was going to continue that journey. I was looking at becoming a provost. Sometimes once you're a provost, you can go into other kinds of administrative roles. Sometimes provosts roll into actually being presidents of colleges. And so I was my master's program was very much about that trajectory. And so while I was at this other university in Kentucky, I heard about the PhD program at University of Kentucky. And again, I feel like I have a lot of serendipitous things weaving through. I ended up being able to take classes at University of Kentucky for free, because there was a consortium of schools, and if you went to some of the different schools in that region, you could go to school for free at certain universities. So I took a few classes while I was still working as a dean. Really enjoyed it, and ended up asking one of the deans at the University of Kentucky, um, like what kind of a program could I do if I wanted to do my PhD? What could I do it in? And he just asked me about my life, like, what are some things that are interesting to you? What are things that you've experienced? And I said, well, I've just, recently lost my mom to chronic illness, type 2 diabetes. And I said it was very unique and different because my mom was an educator, how she talked about her diabetes with us and how we learned about it and how we learned how to care for her. And he was like, you could do a PhD on that. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but that's cool. Because I didn't know all the nuances of what it meant to get a PhD. I just thought that would be interesting to like do research that people would read about, or help communities again. And so it ended up that he was able to find a couple of fellowships for me and put together a little bit of a packet for me that would allow me to go full time to school so that I would have scholarship funding and I didn't have to like totally rely on my own income or just taking classes one at a time. And so then I decided to go full time.
Do you think that before you started that PhD program, that HealthCom was a nationwide major or a well-known field of study?
I don't think so. I think that if you do a little bit of research on health communication and its trajectory, it's a much older field now, but it was kind of a subfield at the time of the field of communication. And when I was in the program, it was pretty young, and University of Kentucky and a couple of other universities were the first leading institutions to actually start doing work in health communication, using that as a major area of study and discipline, as well as even working primarily at first. And there are other, Elaine probably has some different stories to add on to that, Dr. Wittenberg, but primarily working with like doctor-patient communication. That was a real big impetus for the field of health communication starting. And so for me, when I came into it, I will say it was probably still relatively a new field. I think now it's really blown up. It's gotten pretty popular, and you can say the word health communication now, and more people are cognizant of what it is and what you do with it, like what the discipline is and what you can do with it. But at that time, people didn't really, outside of some of the major players, they did. And the major, when I say the major players, those are the major scholars in the field that were getting it going. They were the ones that were really known for what is health communication now. Yeah.
You said you started your career here in Cal State LA in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share any experiences or just rewarding periods of time that you've had in these past several years?
I would say probably one that pops into my head immediately is I was able to get with a colleague that I do a lot of writing with. Her name is Dr. Valerie Rubinsky. And we were able to get a grant through Villanova, which is another university, that would give us like about $10,000. And we decided to do research on Latinx or Latina mothers, daughters, and grandmothers. And so it's looking at tri-generational health issues. And just a lot of the research that I've done in the past probably decade or so has really looked at sexual health. Everything from body agency to menstruation to invisible illnesses among women. And so we decided to take the grant and actually look at how do grandmothers, mothers, and their daughters who are of Latinx or Hispanic descent, how do they communicate about different types of sexual health topics? Everything from, again, menstruation to Oh gosh, what else did we look at? We looked at menstruation. We asked questions about infertility. We asked questions about just the act of sex. And we really wanted to understand like how our health messages around sexual health and body agency passed from one generation to the next, and or are they at all? And so that was probably a really cool study, and it was cool because what I was able to pull in two different um, actually four different young folks who graduated from the master's program. So they worked on the grant as well. And they did everything from creating videos that we use to get the information out in Spanish, to doing the interviews, to transcribing the interviews. And then we did a presentation for it, both at the National Communication Association, and then we did a presentation here on campus. And then we actually just got an award for top paper for the national from the National Communication Association, which we'll get that awarded to us in November when that conference happens. So it's really cool. I really love to see like the longevity of a piece of research and see it through like the beginning of actually the ideal and the ideation of it, to bringing it to fruition, to doing it, to seeing what we find out from it, to then getting publishing done. And it's also cool because it allowed for different Latinx women to get published and to do research on this topic, and then to see what it's like to get your research published. So that probably, I believe, I mean, I've done other research here, but I think that's probably one of the bigger projects that I've done that actually involved former graduate students from this program, who are also doing, most of them doing some sort of health work. Yeah.
In your classroom, I'm sure you have a lot of students that come in and have no realization of what health comm is and how big it's used in everyone's lives.
Yeah.
Have you had any experiences with students who have taken your class and decided to fully change their career route to health comm rather than a different direction of health or regular communication?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I would say that oftentimes once you understand like how relevant health comm is for your day-to-day life, and to me, I think about it from a very, holistic space, from actual the person and how they think about themselves. And that's kind of how I try to teach my class, with a very holistic model. But how they think about themselves, to how they think about their community, to how they think about policies and laws and things that impact their community that are health related, which could be everything from just the environment to, when you have toxins in your environment, you might not realize how it's making you sick, but it has something to do with health, and it could inadvertently have something to do with health communication, to having a sick child. So I try to make sure that the students in my health comm classes in particular, that they understand through introducing them to even storytelling and narratives, like they understand the stories that are told around health, and then they also understand like how then do you create health messages, or how do you engage communities in doing like practical health things that might help them either be healthier, to enact their health, or think about like, how does health impact your community? Like, what does your community look like, and how do you see health happening or not happening in your community? So I oftentimes will see students go like, "Oh wow, this is really cool. I never thought about it before, and I could actually major in it or have it as a minor, and I could do work with this discipline or this degree. I could get a job from it." And it's like, yeah, you sure can.
That concludes our interview. Or was there anything lastly you'd like to say? Any advice you could give to incoming students that are wondering what health comm is, what you would tell them, what you would tell yourself at this age,
Yeah.
not knowing what to do as a communication major?
Probably just to, I would tell students like to try things out. Like, it's hard because the college environment kind of pushes you into a mindset of getting in and getting out. But I would encourage students to the best of their ability that they can with the amount of hours that they have to complete their degree. Like try different things out and don't be afraid to don't be afraid or overwhelmed by being all over the place or being kind of like unstructured with it, because I think if you can like get into a critical cultural class on feminism and then take a health communication class on health narratives and then take another class on rhetoric or whatever, you start to pull these pieces together of things that from the readings that you do and from the professors and the assignments, you start to pull pieces together that make sense for yourself, not for me as your professor. And I think to me that makes sense to me because that's kind of how I discovered health communication. I feel like it was again, I keep using the word very liberally, but it was very serendipitous. It wasn't something that I had heard of. I just knew that I was fascinated by the fact that I thought my family was a little bit different in how we talked about my mom's illness and that we talked about it. And I was just always asking questions around that, like why is that? Why do we talk about it? I don't see my other friends who have a parent who has an illness talking about it. What's different in our family system? And then watching a parent live through this illness and seeing what it can do to you and seeing them go to medical visits and stuff. I had a lot of awareness about health and health spaces, but not enough to go, oh, I'm going to go get a degree in health communication. I didn't know what that was. So I just think like sometimes that our learning happens in a very backwards way and we put ourselves down. We are like, oh, I feel so bad. I didn't arrive at this. Or we say, oh, I'm a late bloomer. And it's like, no, you're not. You're just arriving at this at a time in your life that it's meant to be for you. It's not, there's not a significant and or manageable order all the time. And yes, there are people in your life and around you that will go through something and be like, well, I did it this way, this way, this way, this way. It doesn't mean that that has to be the route that you take. So to me, I feel like I'm always telling my students to not be afraid with the discovery of like who they are and how they manifest that thing that they want to manifest.